Hey, what's up? Hello. I hope you all are doing well. It's been a little while, but today I want to talk about a book that I heard about first on NPR, and it came out in April of this year, 2019, and it is called Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. Susan Choi has a number of other books that are all fairly highly rated, at least on Goodreads, but this is the first work of hers that I have read. And this book follows a group of high school students in suburban America in the 1980s who all attend an elite performing arts high school, and they're all studying theater there. And there is a considerable amount of focus on the romances between all of these students, as well as the rather unorthodox and intense teaching style of their instructors at this place. The time frame in this book is fairly long, although it is set in sections. There are 3 sections of the book, and each sort of gives you a different view on that time frame. Really what's most notable about this story is the language and the structure. This is not a book with defined chapter by chapter linear story progression. It sort of starts itself again and again and presents itself in different ways in those 3 sections. There are no chapter titles, there aren't even any chapters. The 3 sections are just titled with the title of the book, so it's Trust Exercise all throughout. The beginning of this book puts you right in the middle of the action for these characters as observers of their actions and also their interactions with others, how they're all relating to each other in class and at home, with some very specific focus on 1 or 2 of the folks who become relevant later in the story. It feels very angsty, it feels very painful to read, almost like you're just too far in there. It's like you're following them around day after day, and you're so close to what's happening in all of their life. It's just, I don't want to say cringy, because that has a connotation of it being bad, but it's just so painful to witness this first section. And then you sort of slip into the middle. This part ends and you get the title, Trust Exercise, again. And it's very different from the first part. It feels very Joycean, very James Joyce-like, that stream of consciousness sort of back and forth, meandering almost and cyclical. It shifts in perspective in some sort of weird subconscious retelling ways. There'll be I and her and she and my, all of those pronouns in the same sentence or the same couple sentences that comprise a paragraph all talking about the same thing. It's very unusual. You can't quite get a grip on who is telling the story. Is it being narrated? Are you in someone's head? Is someone talking to you? It's very confusing. And then conversely to that, you get to this 3rd section, Trust Exercise, which feels abrupt. It feels, to me, it felt contrived. It fit with the themes of the book, but it was also different enough that it didn't sit right with me as an ending. It didn't really felt like it meshed together well enough with the other 2 that it didn't feel jarring and out of place. It's not really a spoiler to say that this book deals with constructions of truth. It's sort of right there on the jacket information. Each section is really indicative of that, how the same idea is constructed in separate ways by different people. But figuring out what's real in what's happening is almost harder than figuring out what plot point comes next, which I think says a lot about the predictability of some of these ideas, especially getting toward the end. And I really enjoyed the style and tone that this all was done with, along with the language and the language shifts that were used to make it happen. And I'm purposefully not saying too much about the plot and what happens to these characters, or even what their names are, not because to do so would give too much away, but because their identities and the way that they interact with each other and the way that they feel about each other is really central to making all 3 of these sections fit together. So I feel like to give you too much information about that does start to begin to unfold too much, which I don't want to do, and I think is important, because I've seen a lot of people on Goodreads either not enjoying this or saying this one just didn't work for me, but I love Susan Choi's work, or just like DNFing this book because they didn't like the style and didn't find the characters meaningful or strong, all of which I can understand. You know, we all have our own doorways to reading. I also quite disagree. Compelling characters can be a really good hook into a story, but I don't always feel that it's necessary to be invested in the entirety of them in order for the book to be good, particularly when it's clear that a book isn't set up to take that tack, to make those characters like the highlight of the story itself. The highlight for this book is clearly the structure and the language. It's not necessarily those characters, although they do play a large role, especially in affecting the way that that structure works. But they work together, and one of those elements is stronger than the other, most certainly. I would be really interested to see what folks who like Joyce's work, or Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I would be really interested to see what those folks feel about this book and their interpretation of that language and that kind of retelling of a story. Those are probably the folks to whom I would recommend this. And lastly, I also just want to go ahead and mention that when I heard about this book on the radio, there obviously wasn't a trigger warning presented there, and so I do want to say that this book addresses the ideas of consent and sexual assault throughout it, which I quite wish I had been aware of before I had gone into the book. So if that's something that you want to be aware of in your reading and you do want to try this book out, you should know that before picking it up. So despite a lot of my issues with it, the writing and the style and the way it was crafted made up for a lot of the plot lacks that I saw. Enough that I gave 4 out of 5 stars to Trust Exercise, which is very high for a book that made me uncomfortable and also made me think considerably about what was going on a lot of the time. So if you have read this book, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to know what other people have thought. As always, everything you want to know about us is indeed in the description. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives, and we will see you very soon.